So welcome everybody. So let's start the last lecture of the mini course of Jean-Francois Kent on harmonic analysis on trees. Please.
Thank you. So let me recall where we were yesterday. So my setting was the setting of studying a tree. So X is a tree. And now the tree is assumed to be regular, which means that for any X, dx, degree of X, which is the number of neighbors of X, is equal to Q plus 1. And Q is a fixed integer. Q is at least 2. And I told you this homogeneity assumption is somehow like assuming that I'm in constant curvature, or that if you are fond of Lie groups, that I'm studying a locally symmetric space of rank 1. So if you are not fond of Lie groups, this is like studying the hyperbolic line. And I took a discrete co-compact group of isometries of X, meaning so that gamma is a subgroup of the group of automorphisms of X, which is a uniform lattice. And so meaning that what it means is that gamma is discrete. So it means that for any X in X, gamma X is finite. And the quotient tree, the quotient graph is finite. And then I studied yesterday I started studying the Ihara trace formula. So this formula, it's a formula for describing the spectrum, so relating the spectra of two operators. So we have one operator, so I define X1 as a set of edges of the graph, meaning so the set of pairs which are neighbors. And there are two operators acting on functions. So you have two quotients. You have the quotient of vertices and the quotient of edges. So the space of function on edges, I denoted by H0. H0 is the space of all functions on X to R, vertices, sorry, which are gamma invariant. And then I denoted by H1 the space of all functions on from X1 to R, which are gamma invariant. And so on both these spaces, so these spaces are finite dimensional spaces, there are operators which come from the geometry. So somehow there is an operator P from H0 to itself, which comes from the geometry, and which is a kind of discrete Laplacian. So it's 1 over Q plus 1, the sum over all neighbors of U of Y. It's a discrete Laplacian. And there is an operator on H1, which is a kind of transfer operator. So actually, when you see H1 as a space of function on the isolated one-sided shift, this operator is exactly a transfer operator. So it is the sum for all neighbors of X, which are not Y, of phi of ZY. The picture for the first operator is that you have a point and you look at all the sphere and you do the average of the function, the values of the function on the sphere of radius 1. Whereas the picture for the second operator is that you have an edge and you look at all past points Z and you do the average of the values of the past edges. This is why it looks like a transfer operator. And I stated yesterday a description of the spectrum of T. So T is an operator in a finite dimensional space, and P also is. But P is self-adjoint. P is self-adjoint with respect to the natural scalar product. So if you have UV in H0, you define their scalar product, which is the sum over all points in the quotient of u of x, v of x. And I explained to you that you have to be careful. In case the group is not torsion-free, it's better to normalize the sum by dividing by the cardinality of the stabilizer. And if you have phi psi in H1, I define the scalar product phi psi as being given by the same kind of formula. So it's x, y. And I divide by the cardinality of the stabilizer, but now it's the stabilizer of the pair. I do the natural scalar product. The point is, I showed you yesterday that P is a self-adjoint operator. So we know that the space H0, the space of function on vertices, it can be split as the sum over numbers varying in the interval -1, 1, because we showed also that P has norm lower than 1 of the spaces H0t, and H0t is the set of functions U, such that Pu equals Tu. This is the eigenspace associated to the eigenvalue T. And now I will try to study the spectral theory of T, knowing this spectral theory of T. And the main tool is to introduce two operators. So there are two operators from H0 to H1, which are defined by looking at functions on edges which only depend on one of the vertices of the edge. So L phi, sorry, I try to stick to my conventions on notation. Lu, so if U is an element of H0, Lu of xy is just U of the left point, whereas Ru of xy is U of the right point. So due to the nice formulation of my the definition of my scalar product, I know that the adjoint of this operator are given by this formula. L phi is the sum over all neighbors of x. Sorry, L star phi, and I get lost also. So L star will be an operator, L star and R star, the adjoint operator, will be operators from H1 towards H0. Taking adjoint reverses the arrows in algebra. So what it is just the sum over all values of the function on the neighbors of a given point. And R star is the sum over all neighbors of a point, but I take the function in the other order. So now there is so I have two embeddings of the space H0 inside H1. So I will split H1 as an orthogonal sum. It will be the sum of a space E plus an orthogonal subspace E orthogonal. And what will be? I will define E as being the functions that are genuinely functions of the edge. So this is the orthogonal subspace of LH0 plus RH0. Okay, a function in LH0 or in RH0 is a function that does not really depend on the edge, but only on one of the two endpoints. So these are functions that are not really functions of the edge. So the true function of the edges are the functions that are orthogonal to this function. Okay, and now what happens is that it is so this I can also write it just by standard algebra as the intersections of the two orthogonals. But now the orthogonal subspace to the range of an operator is the kernel of the adjoint operator. So these two subspaces, they are nothing but the kernel of the adjoint operator, and this one is the kernel of the right adjoint operator. Which means that the functions in E, the genuinely functions of edges, They are just the functions phi, which are gamma invariant, and which satisfy, which are killed by those two operations, which means that for any x in X, if I look at the sum over neighbors of X and phi of xy, it's the same as the sum of the neighbors of X of phi of yx, and both of them are 0. Which means, so I have a function on edges, and each time I take a point x and I try to reduce my function on edges to make it into a function on vertices, it gets killed. There is no way this function can interact with a function on vertices. Okay? And for these functions, it's a direct computation that t phi, if phi is a function in this space E, actually t phi of xy is nothing but minus phi of yx. So the action of my operator t on these spaces of genuinely functions that are genuinely functions of edges is just an involution that is reversing the order of the variable, multiplying by -1. So the spectrum will be plus or minus 1. Okay? And if you want to compute the dimension of the spectrum, you have to carefully look at how to build these functions, and you can end up with the formula that I gave last time. So if I have time, I will prove the formula. So you can split E as the direct sum E plus E minus. E plus will be the symmetric functions, and E minus will be the skew symmetric functions in E. And on E plus, the operator is -1, so you have to be careful because there is a minus in this formula. And on E minus, the operator T is 1. And then you can look at what it means, and you can see that if gamma is torsion-free, so if I have time, I will prove it later, okay? But if gamma is torsion-free, the dimension of E plus will be the cardinality. So when gamma is torsion-free, the number of edges is always even. So it's the number of non-oriented edges minus the number of vertices plus 1. And there is also a format, the dimension of E minus. Excuse me. There is an analogous formula for E plus, but it depends whether the graph is bipartisan. So now we have described the action on E, and it turns out that in the decomposition H1 equals E plus E orthogonal, actually both spaces will be invariant by the operator T. So now I have understood the spectrum here. I need to understand the spectrum here. Okay. And what is E orthogonal by construction? It is just the space of function which can be obtained by one of my two operators from H0 inside H1. And it turns out that there is a kind of miracle that it is very easy to write the action of T on this space by means of the action of P. So now I will write something very formal, that is, I will consider a new operator that is a mix of R and L. Okay, so this will be an operator from the pairs of functions towards H1. So I call it B because I will do the trick on both sides. This is for both sides. Okay, and what is B? So B. So I will write pair of functions as column vectors, and you will see in 1 minute why I want to write it this way. B of a pair UV will just be LU plus RV. Okay, so by definition, B of H0 squared is the space that I have denoted by the orthogonal of. Okay. And now I have a nice formula which explains everything. Actually, the core of the Ihara trace formula will just be the fact that if I look at TB, that is, I have a pair which is of this form, and I add by my transfer operator on this pair, Actually, this is the same as, I will cheat a bit, excuse me 1 minute. This is the same as Q plus 1 P, Q, minus 1, 0, acting on UV. So what do I mean by this writing? I mean that this is a 2 by 2 matrix, and I have a column vector. Okay? But in the matrix, I have put an operator. But this is just an operator of H0. Okay? So what I have is just this 2 by 2 matrix. It is a linear operator of H0 squared. Okay? So I claim that the action, it's a semi-conjugacy. Sorry, I forgot something. Okay? This is a semi-conjugacy equation. I'm saying that the action of T on B of a pair is given by first acting by this new matrix and then acting by B. And the proof is absolutely trivial, but it is a wonderful remark by Ihara that when you do this computation, so let us prove this, okay? I fix a pair X1 in a pair, an edge, okay? If I compute T B of the function UV evaluated at X, Y, what I'm computing is just T of, I'm computing, but by definition, I'm just computing the sum over all neighbors of X which are different from Y of U of Z plus V of X. Because this function is nothing but LU plus RV evaluated on the edge. The edge, here it's ZX. Okay. But now you see, you split this sum into two parts. And you write this as the sum over all neighbors of X of U of Z minus U of Y plus Q V of X. And this is exactly the formula I wrote here. So now you see that this space of functions LU plus RV is stable under the operator T, and that actually the operator T acts by this nice matrix. But now what happens is that I have, so now I'm just looking, if I want to study the operator, I'm just looking at this matrix acting on H0 squared. And I have split my space H0, I have split it as the sum over all eigenvalues of the operator, of the P operator, the discrete Laplacian, so that in each of those spaces, actually, the matrix I'm looking at, it is just this matrix. Okay. And this matrix, now if I want to understand its spectrum, it's very easy. It's just a 2 by 2 matrix. So the spectrum of this matrix, this is the pair. So it depends. If T is just a small computation, to say that if T square is different from 4Q square divided by Q plus 1, not 4. I know the formula by heart. Sorry. Okay. When you want to study the spectrum, you have a second degree equation. What I'm writing is that the discriminant is non-zero. You look at the equation, which is Q plus a square equals Q plus 1 T. And depending on whether the discriminant is 0 or not, you have either one root or two roots. If you have one root, actually what you have is a matrix that has a triangle that has two spectral values that are equal, but one of them is not an eigenvalue. That I mean, okay, sorry, I'm a bit confused. So if I look at this matrix, I'm saying very elementary things in a very complicated way. Sorry. What I mean is that if T square is different from 4Q divided, okay, then actually this matrix, it is conjugated to U Q over U, where U is a root of this equation. And if T square is this, it means that U is equals to plus or minus square root of Q, and the matrix is conjugated to U, 0, 1. Okay. So what I mean is that once you have this reduction, elementary reduction of 2 by 2 matrices, actually you can describe the spectrum of the operator T from the spectrum of P. And this is all the core of the formula. I wrote a complicated formula, but what it means is just, and when I gave the statement yesterday, it's much more complicated to give the statement than just saying you look at this 2 by 2 matrix, you then diagonalize it. Okay. And there is just a case where you cannot. Okay, so now it tells me that I know the spectrum, my operator Q plus 1 P 1, sorry, I already forgot the formula. Q minus 1, 0, it's very easy to describe its spectrum on H0 squared. And there is just a small trick that I have defined an operator B from H0 squared towards the space that I have denoted by orthogonal of E. Okay? But this operator is not necessarily, so B of UV is LU plus RV, but this operator is not injected actually. Okay, so I have in the spectral values here that I have defined just now by diagonalizing my matrix, I have to take some of them out because actually there will be spectral values in the kernel of the operator B. So to finish the proof, I have just to look at what the kernel of the operator, how the kernel of the operator B looks like. And how it looks like is that, what does it mean? So let us define, to finish the proof, we need to describe the kernel of the operator B, which is very easy. So what does it mean for UV to be killed by B? What it means is that for any X and Y, which are vertices, if they are neighbor, then U of X plus V of Y is equal to 0. Okay. But let us draw a picture. So if we take a point X, okay, and we take two neighbors, Y and Z. So what we know is that U of X is equal to minus V of Y. But U of X is also equal to minus V of Z. So what I'm saying is that V of Y is equal to V of Z. Okay? And of course, you will have the same properties for U. So what I'm saying is that actually, if 2 points are at an even distance, then the function V takes the same value on those 2 points. And this relation of being at an even distance was a relation that appeared in the discussion about the graph being bipartite or not. Okay, so I told you there is an equivalence relation on the graph, which is being at an even distance. Okay? And what it means here is that when you have B of UV that is 0, you are saying in particular that if 2 points are related by this equation, that is, if the distance between those 2 points is an even integer, then actually U of X is equal to U of Y, and V of X is equal to V of Y. So those functions, they must belong to a very particular space, which is the space of functions that are constant on the atoms of this equivalence relation. This equivalence relation, it has only 2 classes. But then, if those two classes are not necessarily invariant by gamma. This depends whether gamma is bipartite or not. Okay, so actually the result is that gamma is not bipartite. Then actually these functions, they are constant. And the kernel of the operator B, it will be just spanned by the function, the constant function, okay, the functions of this form. And but if gamma is bipartite, so okay, then I will write a very complicated notation, I will just write h minus 1 for the function
Okay,
u.
mais Jean-François,
Yes.
what does it mean the group gamma to be bipartite?
What it means is that what I'm saying, the group gamma is bipartite has no meaning. What has a meaning is the action is bipartite. So that is the action on the tree preserves or does not preserve the two atoms of the even distance equivalence relation.
I see. Thank you.
So when the action of gamma. Then I will write h minus 1. It's a very complicated notation for the set of all functions u on such that u is constant on atoms, on classes of the even distance equivalence relation, and it is gamma invariant. Okay, so actually they are all gamma invariant, precisely because the group is bipartite. Okay, the action of the group is bipartite, and on this set there is an involution, which I will denote by J. So what is Ju of X? You see, when you have a function that is constant on these atoms of this equivalence relation, actually take only two values. Okay. If you take 2 points which are neighbor to each other, you have the value here, and these are the only two values. Okay. So then what you can do is switch the two values. Okay. So this is okay. So you have an involution. This is very complicated. I'm describing the involution on a space of dimension 2. So just a lot of language just to describe a very simple object. Okay. But so now the kernel of B, okay, you can write it as the space U minus U. So sorry, U minus JU, where U belongs to H minus 1. So you have some kind of algebraic structure. You have a map from the space H minus 1 towards the space A0 square. And then you have a map towards H1. Okay, so this map it is just defined by this formula. Here I have the map B. Okay, and now it's really easy on this space. It's really easy to look at the sum of the operator P. Okay, and actually, so it will be related to the biggest eigenvalue. That is, if I look at the action of the operator Q plus 1 P minus Q 1, no, sorry, I'm lost again. It's Q minus 1, 0, acting on U minus Ju, where U belongs to this space. It is just, here what you have is just Ju and minus U. Okay? Because you are, if you look at, okay, let me prove it because I'm too quick. What is Q plus 1 Pu of X? This is just Q plus 1 Ju of X, because the value of all neighbors is the same. Okay, and this value I call it Ju. Okay, so this is just what I'm saying is this. This is a very trivial function. So you see now that the eigenvalues. So now we want to study the action of T on that space, but looking at the action of T on that space is looking at the action of this matrix on that space. Okay. So for this matrix on that space, I have defined the spectral theory by diagonalizing, etc. And what remains is the action on that space. But the action on that space is just the action of my involution, whose eigenvalues must be 1 and minus 1. So if you look carefully at what I wrote in the statement yesterday, okay, I told you that if you want to describe eigenvalues of T in H1, okay, you take an eigenvalue of T where T is an eigenvalue of P in H0, and you solve this equation. Okay, but I told you, you only do this on the open interval. Okay, and on the closed interval, then you add two of either. So if gamma is the action of gamma is bipartite, you add Q and minus Q. And Q and minus Q, they correspond to the case T equal 1. In case T equal 1, this equation has two roots, but two of the roots, they are killed by this phenomenon here. Okay, this is one for T equal 1, T equal plus, T equal minus 1, you have a special structure. Okay. So this explains the choices I made in the statement. But you have to be careful with the kernel here of the natural map from H0 squared to H1. Okay. So now I have proved the formula. Maybe, yes, I can explain you how to compute the dimension of E plus. Okay, I told you that, the space that I denoted by E minus. So E minus, I told you, this is the space of all functions. Phi from X, such that for any X, the sum over all neighbors is 0, and phi is Q symmetry. And this is the eigenspace of T associated to the eigenvalue 1. So what happens is that when the group is torsion-free, if the group is torsion-free, gamma is torsion-free, then the dimension of skew-symmetric functions, of course, all my functions are gamma invariant. Of the dimensions of the space of all skew-symmetric functions on X1, on the quotient, but since the group is torsion-free, you can never preserve the edge. So the dimension is just 1/2 of the number of edges. Because if you ask that the function is skew-symmetric, then you have the value, if you have your value on an edge, you have the value on the reverse edge. Okay, so this number, it is just the number of the dimension, it is just the dimension of the space of all skew-symmetric functions. But so another way of defining this space is just to look at the space of all skew-symmetric functions. And there is an operator, you can look at the operator L minus R. So it's a kind of derivation operator. So it is an operator from H0 towards the space that I could denote by H1 minus, the space of skew-symmetric functions, and N minus R of a function U evaluated at xy is just U of x minus U of y. So you have an edge, and you take a kind of derivative of the function U on the edge. And now your space E minus, it is just the orthogonal, it is the orthogonal complement of L minus R I0 in H1 minus. Okay. So the dimension of E minus it is the same as the dimension, it is 1/2 of the dimension of the full space minus the dimension of that space. And the dimension of that space, it's the number of points plus 1, because again, your operator, it's not injective. It has a null space, which is exactly the space of constant function. This is why you have this nice formula. Okay. And what does not work in this formula is the fact that the number of skew-symmetric, for the dimension of skew-symmetric functions to be this, you have to assume the group to be torsion-free. There are examples with torsion where there are no torsion. non-skew symmetric functions. There are no skew symmetric functions.
Sorry, Jean-François. This last formula is the dimension of E minus or E?
Yes.
Or the last one?
Because there is something a bit perturbing here, that E minus is the space of skew symmetric functions is related to the eigenvalue 1 of the operator.
1, yes, I see.
It's perturbing, I agree with you.
Okay, we adapted. But some other thing. Should we dream some geometric interpretation of E minus?
So E minus, you can also think to it. So it's related to the cohomology of the fundamental group. Because you see, this is parallel to the fact that if you have let me try to state, it's related to Hodge theory somehow. Okay. Because this is a space, you see, this is a space of skew symmetric function on edges. So this is a space of one form. Okay, and so the space of skew symmetric function on edges have to be thought of as one form. And when you add this new assumption, this function, you are assuming that your one form is harmonic. So this formula is exactly, and it turns out that this dimension is just the first Betti number of the group. Okay, this is the formula of Hodge theory. It tells you that the dimension of the space of harmonic one forms is exactly the first Betti number of the fundamental group.
Thanks.
But so I have 5 minutes for giving the first lectures, so I won't do it. Okay, and what I just would like to say is that to explain you why I'm interested in this. So because everything I have told you is maybe 20 or 30 years old. Okay, and the reason I'm interested in this is because in general I have gamma, a trilattice, and I can just think of gamma as being a free group. And I want to understand unitary representations, and actually I'm interested in the free group. Okay, I want to understand unitary representation of gamma. And when you have a unitary representation, you can try to. I want to understand their spectral theory, but it's a non-abelian group, so I don't know how to define first what it is to understand the spectral theory. But one way of doing it is to, if you gave a Hilbert space equipped with a unitary action of gamma, then instead of looking, that is, I have just dealt with the case where the Hilbert space is the trivial representation of the group. When I look at the space of all functions of the quotient, I'm looking at actually the trivial representation. So in general, I want to look at all functions from x, say, to h, okay, which are gamma invariant, meaning that I have functions, my letter was u. U from x to h, and u of gamma x is gamma u of x. So when I was studying the space that I have called H0, I was just studying the case of the trivial representation. But now I want to take a representation that is not a trivial one, but still on that space, I can put a scalar product. I can put the scalar product where u scalar v is defined by the same formula. The sum for all x in the quotient of 1 over the cardinality of the stabilizer. But now u of x, this is an element of a Hilbert space. So I can look at this scalar product. So I have a Hilbert space, okay, and on that Hilbert space, I still have my operator. And now, what it is to understand the spectral theory of gamma in H, it is understanding, so this operator will still be a self-adjoint operator, and I could ask what is its spectrum. And in general, nobody has any answer with this. Okay, but actually, I have the vague idea that if the representation can be somehow linked to the geometry of the tree, in the spirit of IARA trace formula, I should be able to say things on the spectrum. So what linked to the geometry of the tree means I have no idea. Okay, but what is true is that I can build examples of, I can build a wide class of representation that are very closely related to the geometry of the tree. And for this representation, you can do exactly the same work as in IARA trace formula and end up with very precise computation of spectra by this kind of thing. And then I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? I think Catherine wanted to ask a question.
Yes, well, I have difficulty to follow, but it was perhaps the following question makes sense. You define the transfer operator, and usually in dynamical system theory, you have a transfer operator on functions, and you look at the dual, which corresponds to measures, and for example, is useful to construct invariant measures. What is the dual to this transfer operator you define? T.
Yes, yes. What happens is that when the pressure, so for the moment, so I'm not the first one who is trying to understand the unitary representation of the group thanks to geometric properties of the tree. Okay, and I thank you very much for this question because I will give the fourth lecture now. And
it does make sense.
The point is that when you have in general, when you have a transfer operator on the quotient, okay, so I defined so my operator was a very particular transfer operator. But in general, if you take a potential on the quotient, so I have this one-sided shift, which I denoted by gamma over S plus. And if you can just define transfer operators by this normal formula, and when the pressure is 0, you can build invariant measures for this transfer operator here. Okay, and it is a classical fact, actually, negative curvature in general, that there is a duality between the cohomological properties of the shift here and the cohomological properties of the action of the fundamental group on the boundary of the tree. And you have all the language. So in general, it is not written for trees. It is written for manifold with negative curvature. There is a survey paper by Le Drapier about this, or work by Otal, Amundstedt, people like this. Okay, that you have two languages, the language of the shift, the language for the action of the shift here, the language of the action of the fundamental group on the boundary. Okay, and there is a dictionary between these two languages. And when you start with the function, when you add the data of a potential with 0 pressure, what you build is a measure. Okay, so when you start with a potential, so I define you the Boozman cocycle the other day. But in general, if you start with a function, you can associate to it a cocycle that has the same combinatorics as the Boozman cocycle. So it is a cocycle from x cross dx. You have some kind of Boozman cocycle. And when the pressure is 0, what you build is a quasi-invariant measure. The same way as in Patterson-Sullivan theory. Patterson-Sullivan theory is the case of the uniform measures that the potential is a constant function. But in general, you have Gibbs measures, and Gibbs measures give you quasi-invariant measures on the boundary. And it is a general fact of group theories that if you have a quasi-invariant measure, you can build a representation, a unitary representation. And there is recently, there have been a lot of work by people, Bader-Mushtik, and then Boyer, Gancharek, I think, I don't know how to write the name, okay, that have been studying these unitary representations, okay, and that have proved, for example, that they are irreducible or this kind of property. Okay, so yes. Thank you for this question.
Oh, thanks for the answer. This
is what I wanted to stay all today. So.
So well, can I ask?
Yes. No, you also answered the other question I had. You mentioned that the regular tree is the most, you should imagine it's like in constant negative curvature. And these
Yes.
objects you define what you summarize as this correspondence to the corresponding concepts in negative curvature. Yes. Okay. Well, I think it was just a comment.
So actually, yes, the good trees, you can do a bit more than regular. There is a case where you have, I told you, you have this partition into two sets which correspond to the even distance equivalence relation. Okay, and then you can take the number of neighbors to be constant on each of the atoms, but not necessarily the same. And then you can do everything for this case. And it's exactly what I say, meaning that the trees you get this way, that is, you have in, you see, the locally symmetric spaces, they are associated to Lie group of rank 1. And actually, you don't have the good spaces are not only the constant negative, constant curvature spaces, but you also have the complex hyperbolic space, the quaternionic hyperbolic space, etc., which are very regular. And actually, when you replace Lie groups over R by Lie groups over p-adic fields, or over so QP or fields of power series over a finite field, then there is a theory that tells you that the role that is played by the symmetric space over R, it is played for a rank 1 algebraic group over a local field, it is played by a tree. Okay, and the trees you get are, sometimes it is called biregular. Okay, they are exactly biregular trees. Okay, so it's really the fact that actually in the theory, the role is placed by some algebraic group that is hidden, and in biregular trees, this is what happens. So it's not not exactly the same as for hyperbolic spaces, but there is a relation with algebraic groups over some fields.
Okay.
So when you pick the Riemann surface like C minus 2 points, right? So the homotopy graph is a free group, right?
Yes.
So in this case, you can consider the Cayley graph in the group,
Yes.
and it's going to be a regular tree, right? So can you relate the results in this graph theory to the manifold itself?
The point is that the Cayley graph is not quasi-isometric to the surface because the group has finite covolume. It's not co-compact. So
I see.
But what happens is, yes, when you take like co-compact lattices, they are not three groups, but the Cayley graph will be quasi-isometric to so the Cayley graph is almost a tree, and it will be quasi-isometric to the hyperbolic space. And then actually, yes, if you take cohomology classes of function on the dynamical system, on the geodesic flow, you can associate to them some kind of potentials, but it's more or less the theory of Markov partitions that you
I see.
The fact that there is an associated subshift is more or less the theory of Markov partitions somehow.
I see.
I don't know. This was a vague question, so you had a vague answer.
I see. And let me ask another vague question. So about P, do you know if the spectrum is simple?
Sometimes it is simple, sometimes it is not. So actually, there are some open questions. On the spectrum of finite graphs, there are a lot of open questions. For example, you know there is a question. So I will not answer to your question. I will say something else, okay? But for example, it's not known. You see what happens if you take sequences of graphs. For example, there are questions about expanders, etc. So there is something which is called the Ramanujan sequence. And for example, explicit Ramanujan. This is a constraint on the spectrum, and explicit Ramanujan sequences in when Q is even, that is when the number of neighbors is odd. There are no known explicit examples. So, in general, knowing something about spectra of graphs is rather difficult, but it's a challenging question. So finally, if you take the complete, I should give a simple answer. if you take this graph, okay, then you have multiplicity in the spectrum. And you say this is something that happens as soon as you take covers, because you have actions. If you take, I told you that it is very easy to take covers, actually. It's just taking finite index subgroups on some groups, such as the free group, etc., which has a lot of finite index subgroups. So as soon as you take covers, you will have multiplicity, because you have an action, you will have a group of automorphisms. If you take Galois covers, you will necessarily have multiplicity.
Thank you. So are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question about what
Yes.
you told that there is a, if you look at the potential for your transfer
So,
operator.
sorry, I don't, wait a minute, because I don't hear you well.
Is it, can you hear me or no?
Yes,
Yes.
now I can.
So, okay, so my question is the following. So yeah, you said, well, you could plug in a potential in your transfer operator. So my question is, what happens to P in this case? Is it just a random walk with a different probability of a transition?
There is no P, there is no P. I can plug a potential and do some things, okay? But I don't know how to relate.
Okay, you don't think that there's
It's an interesting question. It's definitely an interesting question. And it's related to the problem that this trace formula, it works when the tree is regular. And when the tree is not regular, I don't know how to do.
well, you can
That
take
is,
a regular tree, but an irregular potential.
But by irregular, I mean the constant. Yes, if you take the regular potential, it's a constant potential, and then it's okay. And but there is a lot of work recently by Guezel on random walk on surface groups, which I see as connected to this.
Okay.
And maybe to your question, that is you would like, and what Guezel does in his work is that he's able, when he has a symmetric random walk on a group, which is a surface group, but surely what he does works for the free group because it's even simpler. He's able to look at objects that are related to the random walk and to associate to this object potentials over the geodesic flow. Sometimes all these objects of the Martin boundary and green functions, etc., they are related to some potential over the geodesic flow. So somehow this is what you have to look for, okay? That some potentials are connected to some functions of probability theory. But when in this particular case that I showed, when you take the simple random walk on a regular tree, the potential is very easy to explicit.
Yeah, okay.
And in general, there are links, but they are still not absolutely clear. So it's a field of research somehow.
Okay, okay, good. Thank you.
Are there any other question and comment? So I have a last one maybe. So you defined this differential is like a directional derivative operator, that right? So if you pick H naught, you can associate a function HY that is just like the directional derivative in some.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah, so in transfer operator, like in one-dimensional dynamics, sometimes you can relate the transfer operator on CR functions to the transfer operator acting, some kind of transfer operator acting the derivatives, right? And they have the same spectrum, pretty much the same spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same essential spectrum. So I wonder if you can do the same here. So you have this discrete derivative. Can you relate the action of P on U with the action of the derivative of P on the derivative of U, right? I don't know if.
Yes. The point is that the derivative, it changes the space. So it's you don't have differential operators. Okay, the only spaces you can look at.
Well, but you have this. You have a vert edge. You can associate with this P this. The difference of the function between the ends, right?
Yes, but it's related to harmonic functions somehow, what you do in this construction. But you cannot, So it's just a discrete operator. You don't have a continuous differential operator. So this derivation operator is just at the level of spaces which are finite dimensional spaces.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
sure.
you can like
Is it-
integrate, right? So if you have this, if you have a function that depends on the edges, you can integrate along the tree, right? And get a function. And if you have a function, you can differentiate. So there is a differential operator in these trees, right?
I don't understand really that.
So if you have some function, you can integrate the function. So if you have a function in the edges, you can just integrate to give you some value at here and add the difference, the value of this edge.
Yes, but these are all discrete operations. It's not all
Sure,
discrete.
sure.
It's
So
not a
that-
continuous differential. Okay, I'm not sure if you. I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Well,
But,
I was just wondering if there is a transfer operator for the derivatives, and you can these discrete derivatives, and if you can relate the action of the transfer operator to the derivatives and to the maps, because in one
I have
dimension,
to see.
yeah.
Yes, I understand. I have to think to this. I'm not sure I have an answer right now.
Okay. So are there any other questions? If not, let's thank John for his last lecture of this mini course, what is very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.